What if your heart has been trying to warn you for weeks, maybe even months, and you have been answering it with the wrong explanation every single time? Because that is what happens, not in movies, in real life, in real people. The heart does not go from perfectly fine to a medical emergency in a single moment. In most cases it whispers first. It sends signals, quiet ones that feel so ordinary, so explainable, so easy to dismiss, that the vast majority of people do exactly that, dismiss them. They blame aging. They blame a bad week. They blame stress. They blame not sleeping well. And then one day, without any of the dramatic chest clutching that television prepared them for, something happens that changes everything. Here is what makes this genuinely important, and not just another health warning you scroll past. In a landmark study of over 500 women who had heart attacks, 95% of them reported that they knew something felt new or different in the weeks and months before their cardiac event. They noticed their body was communicating. But fewer than 30% of them experienced chest pain as part of those early signals, which means the thing that almost everyone has been taught to look for, the pain, the pressure, the Hollywood heart attack, is not the first thing the heart sends. It is often the last. The first signals look like something else entirely. And today we are going to go through all three of them in detail, with the biological mechanism behind each one, so that you understand not just what to look for but why your body produces these specific warnings and exactly what they mean about what is happening inside your heart long before any pain begins. Let me start with a story, because it makes this real in a way that numbers alone cannot. Linda is 54 years old. She is not a person who ignores her health. She takes her medication. She goes to her annual checkup. She eats reasonably well. For about 3 months before what happened, she noticed that she was unusually tired. Not regular tired, a different kind of tired. The kind that was still there in the morning after a full night of sleep. The kind that made carrying groceries up one flight of stairs feel like something her body had to negotiate. She assumed it was her thyroid, or the stress of her job, or getting older. She also noticed that her sleep had changed. Not that she could not fall asleep, she fell asleep fine, but she was waking up in the middle of the night more than she ever had, and lying there feeling slightly breathless, slightly unsettled, slightly off in a way she could not describe clearly enough to mention to a doctor. She assumed it was anxiety, and about 6 weeks before everything changed, her daughter pointed out that her ankles looked puffy at the end of the day. Linda noticed it too. She assumed she had been on her feet too long. 3 months of signals. 3 completely reasonable alternative explanations for every single one of them, and a heart that was progressively struggling to do its job, speaking the only language the body knows how to use and being answered with the wrong translation every time. What I am about to explain will make sure that never happens to you or to anyone you love. Here is warning sign number 1, and it is the one that appears earliest, lasts the longest, and gets misattributed more consistently than any other cardiac signal in existence. Unexplained fatigue that does not respond to rest. Not the fatigue that comes from a long day. Not the tiredness that a good night of sleep repairs. A specific, qualitatively different kind of exhaustion, one that is present when you wake up. That limits activities that used to be effortless, and that has no clear cause proportionate to how it feels. Here is exactly what is happening biologically when your heart is the source of this fatigue. Your heart's primary job is to pump oxygenated blood to every cell in your body, your muscles, your organs, your brain. When the heart's pumping efficiency begins to decline, whether because of narrowing coronary arteries, developing dysfunction in the heart muscle itself, or early valve changes, the volume of oxygenated blood reaching your tissues drops. Your muscles receive less oxygen than they need to perform at the level they are used to. They fatigue faster. They recover more slowly. They feel heavy during activities that previously required no noticeable effort. Your brain, which requires a constant and generous oxygen supply to function optimally, also begins to feel the effect. Mental fog, difficulty concentrating, a flatness in cognitive sharpness that feels vague but persistent. Your body, recognizing a deficit in cardiac output, begins diverting blood away from less essential systems toward the vital organs, which means your muscles and extremities receive even less, compounding the fatigue further. This is not tiredness from doing too much. It is tiredness from the body doing the same amount with a diminished engine. And the defining characteristic, the one that separates cardiac fatigue from ordinary fatigue, is that it does not improve meaningfully with rest. You sleep 8 hours and wake up still feeling that weight, because the deficit is not in your sleep, it is in the delivery system. The study of those 500 women found that 70% of them experienced this specific kind of unusual fatigue in the months before their heart attacks. 70%. It was the single most common prodromal symptom across the entire study, and in the vast majority of those cases, it was attributed to something else entirely, right up until the cardiac event itself. When fatigue is accompanied by any reduction in your capacity to do things you could do before, when you find yourself stopping halfway up the stairs, or needing to sit down after carrying something that never used to require a rest, or feeling like a simple errand has wiped you out in a way that makes no proportionate sense, that fatigue has earned a conversation with a doctor, not a dismissal, not a better mattress. A conversation. Here is warning sign number 2, and this is the one that hides most effectively because it lives in a moment most people have trained themselves to ignore. Shortness of breath during activities that never caused it before. Not gasping. Not a dramatic inability to breathe. Something far subtler and far more insidious. A slight breathlessness climbing stairs that you have climbed 1,000 times. A need to pause mid-conversation to take a deeper breath that you did not need 6 months ago. Feeling slightly winded walking to the car from the grocery store. Getting into bed at night and noticing that lying completely flat feels slightly uncomfortable in a way you cannot quite name. Here is the mechanism. When the heart is not pumping efficiently, blood begins to back up. If the left side of the heart, which is responsible for receiving oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumping it to the body, is struggling, blood pressure in the pulmonary veins that drain the lungs begins to rise. That rising pressure forces fluid into the lung tissue itself. Not enough to cause dramatic respiratory distress in the early stages, but enough to make the lungs slightly stiffer, slightly less efficient at the gas exchange that delivers oxygen to the blood. The result is that you need to breathe more to get the same amount of oxygen you used to get with less effort. Emulsifiers are food additives that food manufacturers use to improve texture, extend shelf life, and give processed foods a smoother, creamier consistency. The two most commonly used are polysorbate 80 and carboxymelchelus. They are in granola bars, protein bars, low-fat yogurts, ice cream, salad dressings, plant-based milks, and hundreds of other products consumed daily by people who believe they are eating healthily. Research published in 2023 using actual human intestinal tissue found that polysorbate 80 and polysorbate 20 directly damaged gut epithelial cells and increased intestinal permeability at concentrations 20 times lower than the amounts currently authorized for use in food, 20 times lower. The damage to tight junction proteins happened not at extreme doses but at the ordinary doses found in the ordinary products that ordinary health-conscious Americans eat every ordinary day. Additional research has found that these emulsifiers thin the protective mucus layer that lines the gut wall, the first layer of defense that sits between the food you eat and the cells of the intestinal lining itself. When that mucus layer is thinned, bacteria that should stay far from the intestinal wall begin penetrating it. The resulting immune activation is chronic, low-grade, and systemic, and it shows up in the body not as gut pain but as inflammation in places that seem completely unrelated to what you are eating. The granola bar you ate as a health-conscious snack this afternoon may have contained more gut-damaging emulsifiers than a piece of cake made from whole ingredients. Food number 4 is one that has been the centerpiece of heart health recommendations in America for decades. Vegetable oil, canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, corn oil. These are the oils recommended in place of butter and coconut oil because of their unsaturated fat content. They are in almost every processed food, every restaurant kitchen, and most home kitchens in the United States. Here is the problem for gut health specifically. These oils are extraordinarily high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids are not inherently harmful. Your body needs them, but your body needs them in balance with omega-3 fatty acids, and in the modern American diet, that balance is dramatically distorted. The ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-6 to omega-3 in the human diet is roughly 4:1. The average American is currently consuming a ratio closer to 20:1, almost entirely because of vegetable oils. When omega-6 fatty acids are consumed in excess relative to omega-3, they become substrates for inflammatory signaling molecules in the gut. They promote the production of compounds that increase intestinal permeability and weaken the mucosal barrier. Research has shown that diets high in these specific oils promote gut dysbiosis and imbalance in gut bacteria that then further drives the degradation of tight junction integrity. There is also a secondary problem with vegetable oils that almost nobody talks about. These oils are highly unstable when heated. At the cooking temperatures most people use daily, they oxidize and produce byproducts including aldehydes and lipid peroxides that have their own direct inflammatory effects on the gut lining. The oil that seemed perfectly fine in the bottle becomes something chemically very different in the pan, and it is entering your gut in that altered form every single time you cook with it. Food number 5, and this is the one that lands hardest, because it is the food most associated with gut health itself. Low-fat flavored yogurt. Yogurt is one of the most powerful health food marketing successes of the last 30 years. Probiotics, live cultures, good for digestion, good for immunity, and all of that is true about the right kind of yogurt. But the yogurt that most Americans actually buy, the flavored low-fat kind with fruit at the bottom or mixed in, sold in individual serving cups across every grocery store in the country, is a very different product from what the probiotic research was actually testing. Start with the low-fat component. When fat is removed from yogurt to make it more appealing to health-conscious buyers, the texture becomes thin and unpleasant. So manufacturers replace the fat with something that restores the texture and sweetness, usually a combination of added sugar and those same emulsifiers we discussed a moment ago. The product that is supposed to be protecting your gut is delivering sugar that feeds pathogenic bacteria and emulsifiers that thin your protective mucus layer simultaneously, and the added sugar creates its own gut lining problem that compounds everything else. Added sugar in the gut directly feeds the bacteria species that produce toxins called lipopolysterids. LPS, which are among the most potent activators of the tight junction and loosening response in the gut lining. Your immune system treats LPS as an emergency signal. When it leaks through a compromised gut wall into the bloodstream, the inflammatory response it triggers is body-wide and chronic. The live cultures in that flavored yogurt are real, but they are being delivered in a vehicle that is working against the very gut environment those cultures are supposed to support. It is the biological equivalent of sending in a repair crew and then pouring gasoline on the floor they are trying to fix. Now let me give you the practical framework, because this information is only useful if it changes what you actually do. Rule number 1. Eat the whole fruit, not the juice. You get the vitamin C, you get the antioxidants, you get the phytonutrients, and you get the fiber that moderates every single negative effect the concentrated fructose would have had on your gut lining. One whole orange, one whole apple. The juice version is a fundamentally different product from a gut health standpoint. Rule number 2. Read the ingredient list of every bar, packaged yogurt, salad dressing, and plant-based product you buy, and look specifically for polysorbate 80, polysorbate 20, carboxymethylase, and soy lecithin in large amounts. These are not rare specialty ingredients. They are in mainstream products on every shelf. Once you start looking for them, you will find them everywhere, and you will start making different choices. Rule number 3. Choose plain, full-fat yogurt and add your own fruit. Full-fat plain yogurt contains the live cultures, the protein, and the beneficial fatty acids without the added sugar, and without the emulsifiers. It tastes less sweet initially. Your palate adjusts within 2 weeks, and your gut lining is getting the probiotic benefit without paying the inflammatory price. Rule number 4. Replace vegetable oils with fats that are stable under heat and that do not drive the omega-6 imbalance. Olive oil for low-heat cooking and dressings. Avocado oil for higher heat. Butter or ghee from quality sources for cooking. These are not the villains they were made out to be for decades. The omega-6 vegetable oil replacement that was supposed to protect your heart has been doing measurable damage to your gut in the process. Rule number 5. Give your gut lining the raw materials it needs to repair. The gut lining regenerates completely approximately every 5 to 7 days, but only when it has what it needs. Bone broth contains collagen and gelatin that directly support tight junction repair. Fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, and kefir increase the diversity of beneficial bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, especially butyrate, which is the primary fuel source for the cells of the gut lining itself. Zinc found in pumpkin seeds, beef, and shellfish is essential for tight junction structural integrity. These are not supplements or protocols, they are foods. And they are the foods that the gut lining was designed to be built from. Here is the bigger picture I want to leave you with. The gut lining is not just a digestive structure. It is the origin point of a significant portion of the chronic inflammation, immune dysregulation, and systemic disease that is increasingly defining modern health. Research has linked increased intestinal permeability to type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, mood disorders, chronic fatigue, skin conditions, and cardiovascular disease. Not because the gut caused all of these things directly, but because a wall that has been damaged by years of daily food choices stops doing the protective job it was built for, and the consequences of that failure spread outward into every system in the body. David's bloating, his fatigue, his skin inflammation, none of it had a single cause. All of it had the same underlying mechanism. A wall that had been slowly, consistently weakened by the foods he was told were protecting him. The good news is this: that wall repairs itself. It can regenerate. It is not a permanent casualty, but regeneration only happens when the inputs that damaged it in the first place are removed, and when the inputs that build it are put in their place. You now know which is which. Share this with someone who has been eating clean and still cannot figure out why their body is not responding the way it should. And subscribe to Wellness Over Time, because next week we are going to go deep into the 5 foods that actively repair the gut lining and rebuild the exact tight junction integrity we talked about today.